I'm really thrilled for this conversation. A very warm welcome to you, Roland Cochrun.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. I saw that I've been thinking about this all weekend just because of how we met. I have, brainstorming the whole time. So excited to be here.
Yeah, so I want to talk about how we met. While I'm trained as a physician, so I maintain HIPAA level confidentiality with my clients, but I do want to say that I have a client. I've coached him and his wife for quite a while, and he has struggled with porn addiction and infidelity and has been so courageous and come through the other side. And they really have a spectacular marriage, which includes frustrating times and moments of disconnection, but they have the capacity to connect in ways that are just extraordinary now, beyond what they ever knew. And I met you, Roland, through him because while he's done some individual coaching with me and couples coaching with his wife, he has found you. And why don't you share what you do? I think it is so significant. And I'm really glad that everyone listening gets to learn from you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, the easiest way to explain it for those who are unfamiliar, there is truly something called sex and porn addiction. It is something that a lot of people didn't know about. I was affected by it personally, and I like to consider myself a pretty smart and connected dude. And even I hadn't heard of it. I mean, the brief little piece that the public heard of it was Tiger Woods, and unfortunately, it was turned out to ended up being a joke. People, kind of poked fun at the fact that he went to rehab. There was a South Park episode made poking fun at that this was just a made up diagnosis for him to be able to, recover from his recover and save as much of his career as he could.
Because I have a whole range of ages of people who listen. Let's just be clear, Tiger Woods, we're talking about the golf player who was at the time labeled a compulsive sex addict because married to this gorgeous, incredible woman, he had all kinds of sex in all kinds of contexts. And once it started coming out, it just didn't stop day after day. And
It went on for like 6 months. I mean, I'm not sure what the final count was, but it was well over 60 women. It probably got up into the hundreds. I didn't pay attention. But thank you for bringing that up. So I didn't forget that. But, that was it's kind of a bummer that more wasn't made out of that because it was such an opportunity to expose a problem that they estimate affects 17% of men in the United States. And my guess would be in most first world Western countries, it's probably close to similar. And it also affects 10% of women.
actually, I just want to put a little plug from a statistic from years ago that there are a lot of problems that I focus on in the Intimate Marriage podcast, which really are problems of Westerners, but porn is not one of them. The porn watching in Arab countries where Sharia law is maintained, this is really an international problem wherever there's access to devices, even though our conversation is really focused on Westerners today.
163,000 people a minute and that's just from the five companies who own the bulk of adult entertainment online. And so there's a bunch of others that's probably not including, but those five, the traffic to those five, it's 163,000 visitors a minute. So yes, this is not a problem only here, but the point is this is an issue. And essentially where I come into place in my particular group that I formed, when I got into this, the challenge was obviously the sex and porn addiction is just a challenge in itself, especially when you're married and this addiction comes out. It's, oh gosh, I'm sure everyone listening can appreciate and understand. It's a very stressful time, to say the least.
And I want to share, either you've encountered it so you know, or you haven't yet. And it's a lot like food addiction because most of the ways that addiction is treated in our society is by abstinence. You know, if you're a cocaine addict, you stop doing cocaine. If you do crystal meth. You stop doing crystal meth. Same with alcohol. Well, if you're a food addict, the answer is not to stop eating. And for me, and I'm sure for you, if you are a sex addict, the answer is not to stop having sex. And if you're a porn addict, probably there's more of a go abstinent approach. But I am not, just to be clear, while we're talking about porn addiction, I am not 100% against porn in all contexts. There are places where it's really important. One, just for example, I know many gay boys who felt gay but had no idea what gay sex would be like. It serves an educational function. So I'm not like a big porn advocate, but I wouldn't want someone listening to think that I, anyway, am 100% against all porn in all contexts. I don't know where you are.
Yeah, well,
In that.
let's get that. Well, and let's get that clear just for everybody listening, because I don't want to turn off someone. I don't want to turn anyone away from this, because this is a very important conversation to listen to. Very important. And so I do want to clarify, sex is an individual decision. It's an individual experience. Sexual expression and sexual experience, really the way I look at it is, as long as it's not harming you and your ability to fulfill your potential, and it's not harming someone else and their ability to fulfill their full potential, I don't have anything wrong with it. Now, I think if you look at the inner workings if you look at any of the documentaries and some of the things that have been shared from some of the women who work in these industries, I would say it, not all, but I would say a lot of the environment is not necessarily helping that woman fulfill their full potential. So then you have to ask yourself morally, do I want to participate in supporting an industry and a practice? But again, it's an individual decision. To me, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do or what not to do with their sexual lives. To me, you really just have to, all I would ask everybody is to take a step back, look at the human beings being involved in this situation, and just make a judgment call if you think this is fair and sustainable. And then from there, yeah, you can make up your mind. I certainly don't want this to be an anti anything, because it really is an individual decision.
And this is part of the context for why I was really looking forward to this conversation, because I think these topics are much more nuanced. Yes, the whole behind the scenes, financially driven dehumanization is a major issue for me. And the other thing, which is just relevant to individuals, is how incredibly inauthentic porn sex is for the most part. And so it may turn you on, but it's not a good resource for enhancing the sexual experiences that you have with a live partner in an embodied manner. But anyway, having put that aside, let's keep going, because
but I appreciate you clearing that up, because it is there are a lot of men who there's a strip club on every corner, and there's porn magazines and adult shops everywhere. So there are people who can hear the concept of sex porn addiction and say, oh, this is a Christian or a religious problem. And again, I appreciate you bringing it up, because I don't actually have a particular religious affiliation. I'm an individualist. I think about sustainability and legacy and humanity. And so the thing that got me to change my views was really rehumanizing the whole process and looking at, I have a 5-year-old daughter. Is this a safe world for her? And not just her becoming a actor or a content creator in this realm, not just that, but the effects on the male psyche, and then her being a woman in the world with men who have this view. So it's a bunch of things that I'm starting to consider. Now, I do want to say this, just to the last thing I'll say on this topic is, don't get me wrong, a novel sexual experience feels fantastic. Don't think for one second that I haven't had them and enjoyed them. And don't think for a second that there's parts of me that doesn't think, wow, that feels great. But my rebuttal always to that is, so does heroin. And there's a lot of people who practice restraint there because there's a lot of other aspects of using heroin that doesn't align. So it's this complicated thing of, just because it feels good doesn't mean we should do it and that it's okay and that it doesn't have consequences. And then also, just because some people have gotten into trouble with it does not mean that, and it's destroying their marriage, doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to destroy your marriage, depending on how you've set your relationship up. So this is a fluid discussion. But anyways, in terms of what the group is and the business is that I formed, it was a place for high achievers and entrepreneurs, executives, business owners, to come deal with this problem. Now, for a lot of you listening are probably already thinking to yourself, I already see where he's going and I see why this is useful, but I still want to articulate it. So as you can imagine, when this issue happens to you, if you're married, oh my gosh, your partner is, maybe they might not hang around. I mean, they might, it's funny, 84% of couples who actually dive into this work stay together is the statistic. I do think that's a slightly inflated number, though, because there are a ton where the second this comes out, the relationship's done and they never want to speak to each other.
Is that 84% of couples who do this work? Or
if the two couples say, hey, we are interested in potentially moving past this, and they get to the office together, I think it's 84, I can't remember, 84, 86, 84% of those couples who actually make it to that step where they have both decided, hey, I'm open to the idea of staying with you and figuring this out. The percentage of those couples who make that step, it's so high. I'll send you the statistic when we get off this call.
Okay. I just want to say that I hear that with some skepticism, and this is why. I believe that for your program, because we haven't even gotten into so many of the brilliant aspects of it. But, just to be actually quite personal about it, when researchers look at statistics of remission and cure from cancer, if someone lives 5 years from their diagnosis, they count as cured. Now, my mother lived 5 years and a week or 2 weeks from her diagnosis. So technically she was cured, but my mother died, and it does not feel at all like she was cured. So I reference that.
Always, whenever you hear anything, it's always like, hey, where's the footnote? And how did they determine this? Was this that did they clear 4 months of therapy and they were considered, or did they get divorced 2 years later? Right.
The reason I want to presence that is because there are so many stages from when the information first comes out, where she finds out he's a porn addict or he's been cheating and hiring prostitutes, whatever it is. There's that stage. And then I don't know if you would detail subsequent stages, but I think there are a lot of particularly women who discover this about their men, and it just rocks the foundation. They're not in a position to make any change until a lot later. And then it's a question, what kind of change?
I would say too, the men don't really understand what's going on either. And so it's very difficult to decide, hey, let's make this work, when both parties really have no idea what's going on other than the facts, right? And so when this comes out, it's as you can imagine, your world's flipped upside down. Here, you thought that in my case, I'm working with men, that your husband only had eyes for you. And all of a sudden, not only had eyes for you, but he was watching pornography 2 to 3 times a week. So he had eyes for, over the course of the relationship, in the course of his life, thousands of women. And then in some cases, they do cross the flesh line, and it's not just, it's not pornography. It's also, affairs or, right now, unfortunately, there's a big variety of sex workers, and legal people have found a way to actually carve out their use. And so it's actually, there are websites where you can arrange these sexual encounters for money, and there's illegal agreements that actually make it legal. So my point is, you find out all this information and your world's just flipped upside down. It's like, oh my gosh, I have, in my case, it was anything and everything under the sun that I had to disclose to my wife. So it's a very intense experience for both partners. It's extremely traumatic for the male because they were unaware. I know this sounds crazy, but they were really unaware of what they were doing. We can talk more about that later. And so their world's freaking out, their partner's freaking out. And so anyways, the process is very laborious. It's intense. It's just as intense as any other addiction, if not more intense, in terms of the demands that especially the betrayed partner is placed, because she's trying to just figure out, am I safe to even stick around? So what she's asking for is everything under the sun, which is understandable. In the flip situation, I would ask for the same thing, because it's like, hey, how dangerous is being married to this individual, right? And what the heck's going on? So anyways, all that to say, what's the business? Unfortunately, most things in this world are built for the 98% of the majority. Well, high achievers make up approximately, say, 1.7%, or it's 2% of the population. And their brains and lives are very differently. Let's ignore the brain piece. Let's just say lives, because I don't even want to say that their brains are any different than anybody else's, but their life's different. They have multiple homes. They have everything they've ever wanted. They have their work environment's either incredibly stressful or it's not stressful at all, and they don't work at all. But the point is, their life is just set up very, very differently. They're used to outsourcing anything and everything, any problem. They're used to just swiping the card and solving that problem. They just live in under different circumstances. And so the reason I had to form a sex addiction recovery group for high achievers was, when they would go to these other groups that are largely serving the majority, a lot of the plans and discussions were all around problems and lifestyle changes and different that were for the majority. And what I started seeing, and I experienced this myself because my brain operates in a very capitalistic way. And so I've enjoyed the fruits of my brain being designed this way. But my recovery was suffering, and it was driving me crazy, because here I am in this room of where I'm used to walking in a room and being the smartest and one of the best, if not the, but I'm used to figuring things out. They were smoking me, and I could not get on board. I couldn't get motivated. I couldn't see where we were going. It was incredibly frustrating for me. And so I founded this group for people who are high achievers, entrepreneurs, executives, because recovering from this is very, very different. And their addiction, which again, I'm not sure if that word's an accurate description for this problem, but it's what people have chosen to call it. Their addiction presents very, very different as well. A lot of men in these groups are compulsively using this as a stress management tool. A lot of high achievers are pretty charismatic. They're smart dudes. They're people pleasers. And so there's a lot more of a people aspect that gets injected into this, and even a status aspect. There's this, oh, well, I'm a successful man. And so there's this expectation that women should find you attractive. And so these men are almost conquesting, not for the sex, but for the validation, the attention, hey, somebody give me an indicator that I have made it, that I'm wanted, that I'm desirable. And, if they've engaged in these practices for so long, you can imagine that just because you got married and have some kids doesn't necessarily take that away.
I'm not going to respond to exactly what you just said. I just want to kind of flesh out why I think you've created such a brilliant solution. Because when I heard about your work, I was reminded, there's an AA meeting for members of Congress, only for members of Congress, because it's probably the most bipartisan group that in all of the Capitol these days. But if someone is a senator or a congressperson in recovery, not even necessarily struggling, but in recovery, they need peers to be able to get the support, give the support that's necessary. And I've certainly experienced this with my high achieving clients, more often doctors and lawyers and executives, but it's all of the same ilk, that they go to a standard sex addict meeting exactly once, because the other people who are there, while there may be plenty for them to learn about recovery, they're not people that my clients would choose to learn from in other circumstances.
In this particular addiction are felons, and a lot of them are attending through court mandate. And so that just kind of dilutes the group as well. When you're attending to improve your life and change your decision, and there's 6 people who have committed crimes against children who are there by court, who are forced to go and have a little thing that somebody needs to sign, it just changes. Again, when we're talking about, I'm happy you brought this up. When we're talking about peer support, every peer in there who doesn't feel like a peer, it's every single person that you add like that doesn't feel like a peer. And again, this is going to be different to every single person. You ask this guy, he might actually feel like his peers are there. You might ask this guy, and he doesn't feel like any of his peers are there. But to your point, if peer support has been proven, which it has been, by a landslide to be the most superior treatment approach. This is back from the 80s. By a landslide, no other treatment approach has the power over addicts like peer support groups. It begs the question, what if they don't feel like peers? And that's really the foundation of my program.
Yeah, I just think it's so brilliant, because anyone walking into one of those rooms, recovery rooms, for the first time is going to feel like they don't belong. Just that's what shame does. So to have the only issue that creates disconnection be the one they're focused on is just really brilliant. So we were talking before we started recording about the use of the word addiction, and I'd love for you to share your different categories, because I think another element for high performers is that it's really complicated to identify as an addict. I mean, it is for everybody when first beginning, but sometimes it's not actually accurate, even if this behavior is problematic and really having negative consequences in their lives and relationships.
The one thing that I would love to just frame up for everybody is the difference between a substance addiction and a process addiction. A lot of people have not heard of process addiction. A lot of the sex addicts and porn addicts who call me have not heard of the word process addiction. They've only heard, you are a sex addict, you are a porn addict. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, a substance addiction, obviously being ingesting something, drinking something, smoking something, injecting something. A process addiction, the high, if you will, comes from a brain process, a thought process. So you're simply thinking thoughts. Your brain is enjoying the story of those thoughts, and you're getting a dopamine hit. And again, dopamine or whatever neurotransmitter is being transmitted. Again, these are not bad. Dopamine's not bad. Oxytocin, all these things are not bad. They can lead to some interesting and compulsive behaviors potentially, but they're not inherently bad. Dopamine provides focus and motivation. It's actually, without it, there are diagnoses of people who can't produce enough of it, and it completely affects their life without medical treatment. And so these are all good things. So I want to say that, but with a process addiction, which I like to call it that. I don't like calling it a sex and a porn addiction. I don't even necessarily calling it a process addiction, because it might not even be a process addiction. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. But you are addicted to a thought process. The most easy way to explain this to your audience in this context is, you're at the gym and this woman looks over at you, and she's checking you out. And you look over and you're like, oh, maybe I saw that wrong. Well, you look over again, she does it again, and she's doing it even more aggressively this time. She's really making sure that she's interested in you. Well, your brain's going to think, oh, that felt good. I must be looking good today. Wow, there's a lot of other guys here at the gym, and she's doing this with me, so I must be superior to them, and so on and so on and so on. So your brain runs through these stories about the significance of that. And if you like that story, for me, I was somebody who was very insecure. I was very shy. I had a really poor track record with women, all up even through my early 20s. And so I had this huge complex around being attractive, being wanted, getting along with women. So stories like that undid the very beliefs that I thought. So I liked them. And just with process addiction, just like substance addiction, I could go after this thing that I like. And if I'm not careful, I could go after it strategically under times where I need it, or at least my body thinks I need it. And you could become potentially dependent on it. So I like to paint the difference between those two because, again, it's for some of the, especially the partners listening to this, no one wants to be married to or even be close to a sex or a porn addict. Oh my gosh, gross, right? Who wants to? And that's why I don't like that term. Is even if you are using those methods and you have become chemically dependent on them, let's say, I still don't think calling it those two words is accurate because, again, he's not lusting after that woman and going to get her number, even though he's married. He's not doing it really because he's addicted to the female figure. He's doing it because he wants to try to get that story more often. He thinks if he gets her number, he can hit her up in times where he can get the story validated more often. So they're addicted to these processes in general. And so that's the one thing I want to clear up is there is a difference between those two. And the reason I bring that up is, as you can see, a process addiction would be very complicated, right? There could be a plethora of processes that this person is trying to get. And that is also why the sobriety rate in sex and porn addiction is one of the lowest of all the addictions and I don't believe it's because it's hard or harder than other addictions. I don't believe that. I believe it's higher than the other addictions because people are not flipping over every single stone and looking at why they're doing what they're doing. They're treating it like a substance addiction where it's like, oh, I just need to stop. And the irony with sex addiction is most of these men, especially in my group, being high achievers and entrepreneurs, they're actually activating the same exact pathway in their career and with money and with other validation from coworkers. So they're actually lighting up the same exact process without sex and porn. But what do you do at 12:45 a.m. when you can't sleep and you're traveling on business and you can't activate it in all of your typical healthy ways? That's really what we're talking about here is, I think, and the reason I do that is also to reduce shame, because I think if you removed a lot of people from the processes that they've become dependent on, I think a lot of people would be freaking out. You took their phone away from them. You took the people. I don't think people understand how many processes they're actually dependent on. And if they were to be removed, they would go through, not physical withdrawal symptoms, but they would have to find some substitute. And I think a lot of people, it might not be sex and porn, it could be something different. But again, to me, I'm less concerned about the medium of choice. I'm more concerned with the fact that you can't sit in a quiet room by yourself without grabbing something to indulge in. So I just wanted to say that before we dove in the 4 areas. I just wanted to paint that picture because I think a lot of people look at this as, oh, you're an addict, you have something wrong with you. I just don't see it that way. I see the world, I see a lot of people dependent on a lot of things. And I think judging the medium of choice, I'd be really careful doing that because I think the person judging, if they're really honest, might have a couple of things they're dependent on as well.
I'm really grateful you presence that. The way that this comes up in my work, not working with a group of men, but working with couples, is the question becomes when these behaviors are cut out, what is a healthy pursuit of pleasure? What is a self-respecting and partner-respecting relationality? And often one of the first conversations is to not demonize desire. And so connecting it with how you've spoken about it, it's like there are these particular neuronal pathways which get reinforced and amplified with all of the successes in most areas of life. And the goal really is to find the new, healthier, initially tentative, but ultimately so gratifying neuronal pathways that actually are the ones to use in relationality, sensuality, sexuality, and erotic pursuits. So I really appreciate how you spoke about that. And why don't you go ahead and give your four?
Well, I think the four categories speak to exactly what you just said, because it's like the goal isn't to live a sexless, passionless life. I mean, gosh, we're not taught that's, if that was the case, most of the men in my, they just get a divorce and just be single then if that was what was being asked of them. And so these four
But it
categories,
often feels like it is in traditional
100%, no,
sex
no,
addiction.
100%.
It's
100%.
like
I trust me, as somebody who's walked that walk, I completely agree. Especially with
it's like
this.
a pathway to becoming an emotional eunuch.
Well, and I think it's gotten a little worse temporarily. The pendulum's starting to swing back, but there was a time, and I know this sounds bizarre, and it wasn't that long ago. There was a time in the 2000s and 90s where the woman was often blamed for not doing fill in the blank, and this addiction formed because of her inadequacies. And that was just so absurd. Well, the pendulum, unfortunately, as it usually does, it's swinging in the opposite direction. So right now, I think we're coming off of that high now. But for the last 5 years, the partner focused. And so it was basically, hey, screw this guy. He needs to blah, 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 blah. And again, relationships don't work that way. You can't be playing this one up game. The only way it's going to work is if the two of you are seen as equals. So, so the four categories, I'll be as short as possible with it. I chunked this up into four categories because what I found was the men coming into my groups were not addicts sometimes. They had a difference. And so Omar Mwangwala, I don't know if you've met Omar. He's just awesome. You need to. He's very hard. He protects his time pretty well. But Omar was the one who trained me. And again, there's holes in all philosophies. I think good practitioners take the good stuff and and leave the stuff that doesn't serve their population. But he was the one who really gifted me categories 2 and 3. So category 1 is the addiction, right? And so, so they'll really go on and on and on with this. Basically, the person has become chemically dependent, primarily on dopamine, to using sex, porn, women, affairs. Why do people use addictions? Dopamine, again, it's not about pleasure. Dopamine is about focus and motivation. And so what these young boys unfortunately learn around the ages of, gosh, as early as I've heard some people as early as like 4, but usually it's right around anywhere from 8 to 12 is their first exposure to pornography. And if they have access to it on a routine basis, it's very, very easy for their brain, not even the boy, but the brain to realize, wow, this moves my attention. That's what dopamine does, focus and attention. So it's like, oh gosh, anytime I'm feeling something I want to feel, this can hijack my attention. And this is all addiction. This isn't sex and porn. This is all addictions. No one becomes an addict because they want to destroy their life and make their relationships difficult and go bankrupt. They become an addict because their brain, not even them, their brain learns, wow, this is a very efficient way of moving my attention away from something that I don't want to feel or see or deal with. So that's category 1, very stereotypical addiction. Again, I've actually found that far less men are actually dominated by that category. And so it would make sense that treating it like an addiction would work, because if it's not an addiction, then it's not. So that leads us to category 2, which in my group is the category that affects these men the most. And that is societal norms, masculine norms, successful male norms. Again, we could have a huge discussion about this, but everyone focuses on the trauma of the young boy seeing the porn. No one really focuses on the bigger issue, is the conclusion that the boy drew when he found his dad's porn stash that was hidden. The conclusion was, men want to look at naked women and we have to hide it. I'm going to say that one more time because it's very important for everybody here. When the boy finds the porn stash, it's not the porn. The porn's traumatic, sure. He's not ready to see something like that, certainly without an explanation. But it's the fact that his dad enjoys it and hides it. And that is something that everyone needs. That message right there, I believe, is probably one of the biggest strikes into this whole problem being birthed in the first place, is this is going on and we need to conceal it and hide it from our coworkers, from our family, from our wives. And again, so societal norms, masculine norms, strip clubs, escorts, pornography. A lot of kids and boys are watching pornography with their friends in middle school. What's the message there? Oh, this is normal. This is pleasurable. This is enjoyable. And I think that's the challenge with societal and masculine norms is this stuff is being deemed normal by society and not necessarily the individual. And again, coming back to our initial thing, I'm not telling anybody what to do or think about sex. What I am saying is just make sure that you are choosing that belief and that you're not just inheriting it from common practices, right? I see a lot of men will be in a social circle where cheating is okay. And what happens? Soon all 14 men in that friend crowd are cheating. And because it's been, oh, this is fine. We only, YOLO, we only live once, right? What she doesn't know doesn't hurt her. So that's category 2. And that one affects men in a massive way. And I actually, one more thing I want to say on that is successful male norms. You cannot turn on a James Bond movie without him sleeping promiscuously with 4 women and having no plans of ever having a relationship with them. And everyone loves James Bond. My mom even admired James Bond, right? And so it's like, oh, wow, mom admires a guy like that. Then that must be and my dad admires him. Then that must be what I need to do is become rich, attractive, sophisticated, and hook up with women, especially because usually one of the women is the bad guy's wife. So it's like, think about that for a second. And these are my idols as a kid. But the other thing I want to hit on is music videos. And, the rapper, he's in his mansion and there's all these women in the hot tub. Even the country music video, he's in the cornfield and all these women with their, little jean shorts and their bikini tops and everyone's getting drunk and making out. It's, hey, if you're successful, if you've made it, and if you're somebody and you're a guy, this should be going on for you. So there's this whole scarcity of, oh my gosh, I got to get that to happen to me. And that it affects way more men than you would think. And category 3 is deception and control. So this is the concept that men could actually be addicted to the lie and like keeping this secret. And that can actually be the motive is they just like keeping a secret. People who are victimized like to lie. That gives them a one-up. They're concealing information from others. That particular category affected me because of how I was raised. So I was actually more interested in just having a secret, which is an interesting psychological concept to understand. And then category 4 is getting your human needs met through sex and sex appeal. And so men will come up with this delusion as to, they'll feel a real human need. Oh, I'm unwanted, unloved. I don't have enough attention. And then so that's actually accurate. And then the delusion is, oh, I just need to have this little quick emotional affair real quick with this woman at work. And that'll kind of take that feeling away. And, I'll break it off at some point when I feel fulfilled. So they come up with these delusional systems of, oh, I'm just on a business trip. I'll just do this whole thing real quick. And, because they feel this need and it's like, oh, well, it's a need of mine and my wife's not meeting it. So now I'm justified of doing it. And again, that's, where we have to really define, is that going to work? Most of the time that activity is not going to work. So those are our 4 categories. To me, I prefer the term compulsive sexual behavior because there are a lot of guys who will have 4 or 5, 6 affairs over 20 years. They'll get caught, they'll quit, and then they'll never do it again. By definition, they weren't an addict, right? And so that's, I think, the issue is if we treat them like an addict and they're not one, are they going to get better? So anyways, that's my approach to this whole thing is it's more so, do you know how to think or are you going to just keep doing this over and over again?
These are such important issues. And I feel like, you and I have, a backpacking trip's worth of conversation to kind of hear one another's language and resonate and so forth. But I want to ask, before asking how people can follow up with you, one question. Now, I don't have the data handy and it's not that essential, but we, as a general rule in society, think of this as a male problem, men's problem, and women are the ones who get dragged into the context by their partners. That is definitely not true all of the time, and that gap is closing. But I just want to say that to be fair and comprehensive. And then my question is, okay, so a woman hears all this and maybe she has suspicions. Maybe she's just found out. Maybe this is something they've been navigating for months or years. What can you say to her in the context of this whole conversation?
It's quite simple. If he's not at a place of being honest with you, which depending on how compulsive this has gotten, and how shameful this has gotten, I wouldn't bank on the truth coming out. What I would say is trust your gut. I would say when you ask these questions and your gut tells you that maybe the answer is not accurate, there might be something there. But I also wouldn't. I'm not also asking you to jump to conclusions. But I would forewarn everybody that the male's drive for deception is nothing personal. But I would say societally, their drive to hide this is really high. And so I don't say that to intimidate people, but I would just say, don't bank on a lot of honesty here, because the shame, cultural shame is through the roof with this topic. And it's really hard for men to own up to where life has taken them.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it may not be personal, but it sure feels that way. And you and I both understand that.
100%.
And I want to add that the only hope here, or what's essential for hope here, it's not the only hope, but what's essential for hope here is really genuinely having a growth mindset. And if either of you lack that, it's really prohibitive. And with that, I kind of want to end on a slightly more upbeat note, because you do such incredible work and the results of the people in your group are amazing. When I encounter this with people who genuinely have a growth mindset and are willing to learn new skills, create new neuronal pathways, the results also are really wonderful. So I know we need to wind up. But will you just tell like a super quick success story, because that's really the juice that we want to share?
No, it's easy. I mean, I listen, the men don't want to be doing this. I'm telling you, even the ones who think they do just don't know enough to know that they don't. And so I think the success story is when I get these men together, I do groups of 10. It's at successfuladdict.com. When I get these men together, if the women affected by this could just see the motivation and determination to act in integrity, the hope in humanity would just return. These guys, I'm telling you, you put them in this room with a bunch of other guys who have done the same things. It's beautiful to watch, because you really do. It's hard to see their flaws after you see them operate and see them own up to where they have gotten. So in no way is this sad. What's sad is what's happened to these young men societally and within their homes to make them this way. But like I said, if they're in a healing container, I've seen the beauty always comes out.
Yeah, and I want to add that when there's, quote, love and sex addiction in a husband and a couple navigates through that, contributing to that 84% success rate, but specifically in one of your containers or working with me or anything comparable, the quality of that relationship is just immeasurably better than it was before the pain and the healing work was done. So maybe we'll wind up there, and you can give your website again. I just really
Yeah, it's successfuladdict.com. And like I said, you can, if you know somebody who knows about this, but if you think somebody could be this, I'm always fine getting on the phone call with somebody, really determining, is this truly a compulsive issue, or is you're better suited somewhere else? But I'm a very approachable person to talk to about this.
wonderful. So if you or your guy are successful by other standards, this is really the place to pursue this. Thank you so much for joining me for the conversation,
Yes,
Roland.
thanks, Alexandra. This is awesome. Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
Okay, that sounds great.